Hi, and welcome to an overview of the web application NetChecklist.com. In this video, I'm going to go over very quickly how the application works and what it can do for you. NetChecklist.com is a web-based task management application that focuses on creating and using checklists. I created it to manage and implement business processes in the real estate and construction businesses that I own, but it is a completely generic application, so it can be used for any type of business or actually for any type of checklist that you want to use it for. The benefit of using checklists in this application to manage business processes or for any other use is that once you've set up the checklists, they can be copied over and over again very easily. And when a checklist is copied, the application automatically adds all of the tasks on the checklist to the task list of whichever members of your team you assign the items to. So none of the important steps in a process get forgotten, and no one ever has to waste time typing the things that need to be done into the application like you have to do in most task management applications, or even writing them down on paper for that matter. Once you do that, everyone on your team will then see the exact tasks that each of you need to do on your task list for every project you're working on. So it's much harder for anyone to forget or simply not do the things that they're supposed to do. And the application also allows managers to check at any time to see what has and hasn't been done by everyone in the organization and on every project. And as you'll see, it also allows you to do a lot of other things that are completely impossible to do with paper checklists. Now, most people assume that the entire benefit of using checklists is to help you remember everything that you need to do. And while that certainly is an important benefit, the features of this application actually provide benefits that go beyond that, helping both individuals and teams work more efficiently, and it actually does that in 7 different ways. Be sure to watch the detailed overview video for all of the details on this, as well as a whole lot more. Documenting your business processes is really important for a lot of reasons, and you're going to see that documenting and implementing your business processes using checklists in this application is far more effective than doing it in other ways, because it puts your processes into a form that's far more effective in making sure that your team members actually follow your processes. No matter how much time you spend training your team, if you don't have a system in place that constantly reminds everyone of everything they need to do while they're actually working, then you're really just depending on them to remember to do every single thing that they're supposed to do the way they're supposed to do it every single time. And this application is a system that does exactly that. Now, I know some of you may be thinking that this application can't really help you because the type of work that you do is just too dynamic to benefit from using checklists. And if you have any doubt how effective checklists can be, even for the most highly trained professionals in the world, then you definitely should check out the book called The Checklist Manifesto, How to Get Things Right by Atul Gawande. And I think you'll see that it demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is actually no one on this earth who is too smart to benefit from using checklists. Okay, so here we go. The first thing you have to know about this application is that it groups everything into organizations. And you can be a member of multiple organizations using a single login account. Here, I've just logged in as a fictional user named Bob Broker. You see up here on the top right. And at this point, Bob isn't working in any particular organization. We see a list of the organizations that Bob is a member of over here on the right. Bob is currently a member of 3 organizations using the account he's currently logged in under. And notice that while we're here, we don't see a task list or even any of the menu buttons that allow us to work with checklists or do any of the other useful things that the application can do. And that's because we're not working in an organization yet. Once we do go into an organization, however, by just selecting one here, we'll go into this one. Now we see some new menu buttons appear up here at the top. And you would see a task list here if you have any uncompleted tasks for this organization, which Bob does not right now. Now, this is the homepage for this organization. It's the page where you work with your task lists, and you get to it using this menu button right here. Notice it has the name of the organization followed by home. Now, you do have another home button over here. This button takes you back out of this organization to the page where we were when we first logged into the application. Now, whenever you first create an account, the application automatically creates a personal organization for you. We see Bob's right here. And if you wanted to use the application for another organization, then you would need to create that. You can create a new organization using this button right here. If you did that, you would just type in the name of the organization you wanted to create and hit Create Organization. We won't do that right now. Let's go back into the fictional real estate company I have set up. Now, once you've created an organization, you can make other people members of it. And once someone is a member of your organization, then you can start assigning things to them. To make someone a member of your organization, they first would need to create their own login account, and then you make them a member of the organization you've already created using the login account that they already created. To do that, to add someone to your organization, you just come under Org Setup and Manage Org Users. Here we see the current members of this organization. And if we select them, we can see the level of user rights that they have within this organization. Here we see Bob is the owner, which is the highest level of user rights a user can have. The different members of the organization can have a different level of user rights within the organization. And a user can also have a different level of user rights in the different organizations that they're a member of. While we're here, let's notice if we select Andy Agent that he is a standard user in this organization. Keep that in mind because I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. You can add a new user to your organization here. It tells you how to do that here, but there's also a video on that. I believe that video is called Managing Organization Users, and it goes into that in detail. Okay, let's talk about checklists. The checklist button on the main menu is actually a split menu button. The main part of the button here takes you to the main page where we work with our checklist, but beside it is a little drop-down arrow that has some other options all related to checklists. And notice that as we hover over each one of these, a little text box pops up that gives you some more information about what that link does. I've tried to include that throughout the application, so keep an eye out for it and it will help you navigate and figure your way around. So on the main checklists page, these are the checklists that belong to this organization. An organization can actually have an unlimited number of checklists, and if we click on one to select it, then we can edit it. Notice that once I've got one selected, it's slightly darker here. Now, there's actually two things that we're seeing here. There's the checklist itself, which we see the name of it up here, and we can edit the checklist itself here. And then there are the individual items that belong to this checklist. This checklist actually has 9 items that belong to it. A checklist can actually have an unlimited number of individual tasks that belong to it, and we can edit or delete each one here. Notice again those little text boxes pop up, and we can also make one dependent on another. I'm going to come back to dependencies in just a few minutes. Now, these tasks are not on the task list right now. They're just on this checklist, and they won't be added to the task list until we make a copy of this checklist. Now, we can also make a new checklist. We can either come up here on the main menu under checklists and say create a new checklist, or from the main checklist page, there's a shortcut button here to create a new checklist. Either way gets us to the same page. To create a new checklist, you would just type in the checklist name here. These other fields are optional, but they are very, very useful. So watch the video on setting up checklists to learn what they do. Once you've got it ready, you would just select this to create your new checklist. Once you've created a checklist, you can start adding tasks to it. Now, adding a task to a checklist, again, is not the same as adding a task to the task list. That's really important to understand. The task you add to a checklist won't go onto the task list until you make a copy of the checklist. So we can add a task to a checklist, again, either up here from the main menu, add a new item to a checklist. And if we do that, the first thing we do is select which checklist we want to add the item to. Now, before I do that, I want to show you one other thing. Okay, we got to add the new task to a checklist here, add a new item to the checklist, but again, from the main checklist page, we also have a shortcut button here, just like we have one to create a new checklist, add a new item to a checklist here, and again, we select which checklist we want to add it to. But if we're on that main checklist page and we have one of our checklists selected to edit it, let's say we're working on this checklist, this button changes. Instead of saying add a new item to a checklist, it says add a new item to this checklist. And if we select it, then that checklist will already be selected for us. So it just makes it a little faster if you're already working on a checklist. But you could certainly change that if you needed to. Once you've selected the checklist that you want to add the item to, you would type in the item. This would be the task that actually gets assigned to someone on the task list when you make a copy of the checklist. Next, you have to select a member of your organization to assign the item to. Here, if you remember when we looked at our org users, these are the current members of our organization, and we can select one of them. And if we do, then it will assign that task to that person every single time we make a copy of that checklist. There is this other user here called Assign User when copying checklist. I'm going to come back to that in just a few minutes. It's a very, very useful feature. Okay, before we can start making copies of our checklists, we have to understand projects. To work with projects, again, you must be working in an organization, and you come up here to the Org Setup button and come down to Projects. And again, these are the current projects that belong to this organization. You can create a new project directly from this page just by typing in the name here and clicking to add the project. And just like with our checklist, if we select one of the projects, existing ones, we can edit it, we could change the name of it, we could make it inactive, we could create any notes for it if we wanted to. Now, projects are simply a way to separate and group the different things you're working on. And what a project is for you is going to depend on what you're using the application for. In our fictional real estate company, a project could be a home that we're helping to sell, or it could be a buyer that we're helping to find a home, even if we haven't found a home for them to purchase yet. If you were a home builder, then a project would be a specific home that you're building. Or if you were an accounting firm, then a project would be an individual client that you're doing work for. A project can be something that you start and finish, or it can be something that's ongoing. And whenever you create a new organization, the application automatically creates a project for that organization called No Particular Project as kind of a catch-all for tasks that don't apply to any specific project, like general accounting or marketing tasks. And if you don't like that, then you can certainly change or rename or delete it if you want to. Now, the tasks on a checklist are not assigned to any project, but all of the tasks on the task list must be assigned to a specific project. To illustrate that, let's go back to our checklist page and select a checklist to edit it. And let's select one of the items on it to edit, and let's edit this item. And notice on here, there is nothing about a project on here. This is not assigned to any project. And that's because right now we're looking at a task that's only on a checklist, not a task that's on the task list. Again, tasks on a checklist are not assigned to a project, but all of the tasks on the task list must be assigned to a specific project. Think about it like this. Just say you're building houses and you have a checklist that you use each time you build a house, just a paper checklist. And you keep a master copy of your checklist that you don't use. But each time you start a house, you take it to the copier and you make a copy of it, and then you write the name of the project you're starting on the copy so you know which house this copy of the checklist is for. The master copy of your checklist doesn't apply to any particular house. It's just a template. But each copy you make of it does apply to a specific house, and that's all we're doing here. Now, making a copy of a checklist is super easy, but before that, let's take another look at one of the checklists that's set up for this organization. Let's look at New Listing for Sale version 1. And this is the checklist, and there are 9 individual tasks that belong to this checklist, and they're assigned to different members of our organization. And notice that actually 6 of them are assigned to Andy Agent, and only 1 of them is assigned to Bob Broker, and Bob Broker is the user that we're currently logged in as. So to make a copy of this, we can just go to Checklists and come down to Copy a Checklist to the Task List. And whenever you make a copy of the checklist, you just have to specify 3 things. The name of the checklist you want to copy, the project that you want to copy it for, we'll select that one, and the user assigned. Now, again, I'm going to come back to this in a minute. It actually isn't going to matter in this case, so kind of ignore that for right now. There is a fourth field that is optional, so I'll talk about that later as well. Once we've selected those three things, we just hit Copy Checklist, and it tells us that one checklist was copied and 9 tasks were copied successfully. So let's go back to our home page for the organization, which remember is this button here, where we see our task list. And notice that even though it added 9 tasks to our task list, only one of them is showing up. And the one that's showing up is the one that is assigned to Bob Broker. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can sort and filter your task list. And you can see some of your current sorting and filtering options right here. We see that we're looking at uncompleted tasks only and that they are sorted by project name. But we can see a lot more of them under this Task Sort and Filter Options button. And this is an accordion menu that opens that, and you click it again and it closes it. Now under this, the 4 buttons on the top control sort order only. So they don't control what shows up, only the order in which they show up. And you can actually set your default sort order under your user settings, but no matter what you set as your default, you can always change it from your default while you're working. Everything below those 4 options control which tasks are going to show up. And by default, the application displays only uncompleted tasks that are assigned to the currently logged in user. And we're logged in as Bob Broker, so that's why we're only seeing the one task that was assigned to Bob, even though we added 9 tasks to the checklist. Now I'm going to log out as Bob and log in as a different member of the organization so you can see what that person would see when they log in. But before we do, make a quick mental note that the first item on Bob's task filtering menu is to filter tasks for user. Just keep that in mind. So here I am now logged in as Andy Agent. And remember, Andy was one of the other members of our organization. And if you remember, a bunch of the tasks on the checklist we just copied were assigned to him. Now, this would be the page Andy sees when he first logs in. Here, again, he's not working in any organization yet. And if you look right over here under Ready Real Estate, it says that he has 6 uncompleted tasks, which that's the 6 that were just assigned to him from the checklist copy that we just made. So let's go into that organization. We can do it here or here. It makes no difference whatsoever. And when we get here, it says it's displaying tasks 1 through 6 of 6. And these are them right there. So the point I want you to get here is that when each member of the organization logs in, they're going to see the tasks that are assigned to them. And this is one of the first things that the application allows you to do that is just impossible to do with paper checklists, and that's sharing the checklist among the different members of your organization. When the different tasks on a checklist need to be assigned to different members of an organization, then the checklists need to somehow be shared among them, and the progress needs to be constantly communicated back and forth between them. And that's very inefficient and difficult with paper checklists, but with this application, it's just automatic. So while we're here, let's look at Andy's Task Sort and Filter menu options. And remember, we made a middle note that the first item on Bob's Task Sort and Filter options was to filter for the user assigned. Well, Andy doesn't have that option, and that's because Andy doesn't have the same level of user rights in this organization that Bob does. Remember, we saw that on our Manage Users page. Bob was the owner of the organization, but Andy was just a standard user. So Bob has the right to see tasks assigned to the other members of the organization, but Andy doesn't. Also notice that up here, we were working with that org setup button. Andy doesn't even have that button at all. And under the checklist button, he does have it, but he only has two items on that, where Bob had, I believe it was 7. Let's leave this organization as Andy, go back to using this home page, and let's go into Andy's personal organization. If we go into that, he does have an org setup button, and if we come down under Manage Org Users, he's the only member of his personal organization, and he's the owner. So see, remember I said a single user with a single login can have different level of user rights in the different organizations that they're a member of. And of course, on his home page, if you looked at his sort and filter options, he does have that filter task for user, even though there's no one else there because he's the only member of this organization. So I'm going to log out as Andy and log back in as Bob again, and I'll be right back. Okay, so here we are as Bob again, and we're only seeing the one task assigned to Bob, but let's go into our sort and filter options, and if we change this to see tasks assigned to Andy, whenever we make changes here, we have to hit Update Sorting and Filtering. Now we see tasks 1 through 6 of 6, and all of these are assigned to Andy. So this is what I meant when I said that managers can see what has and hasn't been done by any of the different members of the organization at any time. And as you see, it's incredibly easy to do that. So not only can he see the tasks that are assigned to Andy, we can also come up here and say tasks for all users and update, and now he sees all 9 of the tasks. So he sees the ones assigned to Andy, the one assigned to Wally, to Sally, and the one to Bob. And also notice that whenever you change things from the default, it's going to tell you up here. Here it says tasks for all users. When we had it just on Bob, it didn't say anything because that's the default. So, but when we changed it to Andy, here it says tasks for Andy agent. So if you've changed it from the default, it's going to let you know up here at the top. So again, if we go to all users, and here we see all 9 of the tasks that were copied with that checklist, and they're assigned to the same users that they were assigned to on the checklist. Switch back to our checklist real quick. And so the application did exactly what it was supposed to do. And for many, many purposes, this would be perfect, and this would be exactly what we need. But for our purpose, there is a problem with this. And the problem has to do with these tasks that are assigned to Andy Agent. And the reason that's a problem is that these tasks were assigned to him because he's the agent that's working on this particular transaction, of course, in our example. But we also have other agents working for our company, and these tasks actually need to be assigned to whichever one of our agents is working on a particular transaction. And we certainly don't want to waste a lot of time creating and maintaining separate sets of checklists for each one of our agents. So what we really need is the ability to dynamically assign these tasks to whichever one of our agents is working on a particular transaction. And this application does give us that ability. I'm going to first go delete the copy of the checklist that we just made. I'm on the checklists copied page. So I'm going to delete that copy and all of its items. So that deleted all of that. And I'm going to come back to our checklist page. So now, instead of version 1 of that checklist, I'm going to look at version 2. And on version 2, those items that were assigned to Andy are assigned to this user called assign user when copying checklist. But if we scroll down, however, add the property to the company website is still assigned to Wally Webmaster. Making the file for the listing is still assigned to Sally Secretary, and review file and web page for accuracy and completeness is still assigned to Bob Broker. So we've left those 3 tasks assigned to those users because those users are always going to be assigned to those tasks no matter which of our agents is working on a particular transaction. So this user called assign user when copying checklist is not a real user. It's sort of a pseudo user, and they can only be assigned to tasks on a checklist. It cannot be assigned to tasks on the actual task list. And using it allows us to dynamically assign some or all of the tasks on a checklist to a certain specified user each time the checklist is copied. So this time I'm going to make 2 copies of this checklist, but this time remember last time we made a copy of a checklist, we came up here under checklist and said copy checklist. This time I'm going to get to it a different way. From our home page where we would see our task list, there is a button here to copy checklist to task list, and if we select it, it also opens an accordion menu just like our sort and filter options did, and under it we see all of the checklists that belong to this organization. And if we select version 2, it takes us to the copy checklist page, and that checklist is already selected for us. So remember, there's 3 things we have to specify: the checklist, the project to copy it to, and on this one I'm going to do Anywhere Drive, and I'm going to do Andy for this one, okay, and user assigned. So the user assigned, it says right here, this user will be assigned to any tasks where the user assigned in the checklist is assign user when copying checklist. So it tells you here exactly what you need to know. Okay, so I'm going to copy the checklist, and again, 1 checklist copied, 9 tasks copied successfully. I'm going to do the same thing again, copy checklist, version 2. This time I'm going to, for the project, I'm going to select 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, and for the user, this time I'm going to select Angie agent and copy it. And now when we go to our home page, we're still seeing tasks assigned to all users. So now we're seeing tasks 1 through 18 of 18. We made 2 copies of a checklist with 9 items. So right now our tasks are sorted by project. So we're going to first see all of the tasks assigned to the project 123 Anywhere Drive. And if we look at them, this is assigned to Andy. Andy. But if we come down here, we're going to see add it to the company website is assigned to Wally, and create the new file for the listing is assigned to Sally, and review file and web page for accuracy and completeness is assigned to Bob. But down here under the other project, 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, these are assigned to Angie. But if we come down here, again, add the property to the company website is still assigned to Wally. This one's still Sally and Bob. So again, the application did exactly what we wanted it to do. While we're here, I want to show you something else. I said that it sorts them by project, but it also groups them. And if we hover over this, again, we get one of our little text boxes, and it says click here to collapse or expand this group of tasks. So if I collapse that, it'll collapse everything for that project. Okay, so we can collapse those down and we can open them back up. It works like an accordion, just like that other thing does. So as you're working with things, it kind of helps to be able to do that sometimes. So the ability to assign tasks on a checklist to the pseudo user, assign user when copying checklist is extremely useful because it allows you to dynamically assign tasks to the different members of your organization at the time the checklist is being copied. And this certainly isn't a benefit that applies only to the real estate industry. I can think of lots of different types of businesses that could benefit from this feature. It could have we talked about a home builder. They could have different superintendents that manage different projects. Again, an accounting firm could have different staff accountants that work with different clients. A service organization could have different maintenance crews that go out and do work. There's all kinds of things this would be useful for. So there is another feature that allows you to also allows you to dynamically assign tasks to different members of your organization. It's called jobs. I don't have time to go into it here, but basically it allows you to create job titles for your organization and then assign a member of your organization to each job title. And that can be very useful. It gives you even a little bit more flexibility. It's not necessarily better in all situations than what we've just done here, but see, you get to it under org setup and jobs. There will be a video on that if I don't have one already. I can't remember if I have or not. Okay, so the last major feature that I want to cover in this video is task dependencies. And task dependencies are used when one task can't be completed until another task or tasks have first been completed. And they're extremely helpful, mainly because they prevent your users' task lists from being cluttered up with things that they can't do yet. In order for a task list to be useful, it needs to be concise. It needs to include only the items that the user needs to do and can do at that time. And the dependencies are also helpful because they enable the application to guide users through a process step by step in the proper and most efficient order. Now, task dependencies are set up on the checklist, not on the tasks that are already on the task list. Remember, this application is all about using checklists. It's about setting things up once and then benefiting from that setup over and over and over again. And once your task dependencies are set up on the checklist, the dependencies get copied with the checklist to the task list every time you make a copy of the checklist. So let's go back again to the main checklist page for this organization, and this time let's look at version 3 of the new listing for sale checklist. And this checklist has the exact same 9 tasks that versions 1 and 2 of the checklist has, but it already has a bunch of task dependencies set up. If we look at the items on it, the first item is prepare the listing paperwork. The second item is to get the listing paperwork signed by the owner. Well, that can't be done until you've prepared the listing paperwork, so it's dependent on prepare listing paperwork. We also have an item to take pictures of the property for advertising. After that, download pictures to the computer and edit them. Well, that can't be done till you've taken the pictures, so it's dependent on take pictures of the property for advertising. Email property photos to the webmaster is dependent on download pictures to computer and edit them. Add property to the company website, which is assigned to Wally, is dependent on email property photos to the webmaster. Turn in paperwork to the office secretary is dependent on get listing paperwork signed by the owner. Make a new file for the listing, which is assigned to Sally, is dependent on turn in paperwork to the office secretary. And Bob's task, review file and web page for accuracy and completeness, is dependent on make file for the new listing, but it's not currently dependent on Wally's task up here to add property to the company website. And it really needs to be, because there's no point in Bob seeing this task and going to the website to check the page only to find out that it hasn't been added yet. That's exactly why task dependencies are so beneficial. So a task can be dependent on more than one other task, and when it is, it won't be activated until all of the tasks it's dependent on have been marked complete. And it also doesn't matter who the dependent tasks and the tasks they're dependent on are assigned to. So it won't matter if we make the task to review the file, Bob's task to review file and web page for accuracy and completeness, dependent on Wally's task to add the property to the company website. And as a matter of fact, Sally's task to make file for the new listing is dependent on turn in paperwork to the office secretary, which that one on the checklist is assigned to that pseudo user or assigned user when copying checklist. So we don't even know who this task is going to be assigned to. On the actual task list, it could be anybody, and it makes no difference who the tasks are assigned to. So let's add another dependency now for Bob's task, and we're just going to click make this item dependent on another. And when we do that, we see the tasks that only the tasks that belong to this checklist. A task can only be dependent on another task that belongs to the same checklist. So only tasks that belong to that checklist are going to appear in this drop-down list. And depending on the dependencies that are already set up for the checklist that you're working on, then even some of the tasks from the same checklist may not show up. And actually some of them are not showing up here. And that's because the application won't allow you to to create what I call circular or redundant dependencies. I don't have time to explain all of that here. I'll cover that in another video on task dependencies, but trust me, it does make sense. So in this case, let's select the item to add the property to the company website and add the dependency. It says task dependency added successfully. And if we come down here, Bob's task is now dependent on those two other tasks. So one of the things I want to point out here, I think this really illustrates how easy it is to have quite a few task dependencies, even on a really simple checklist like this one. I mean, this is really a really oversimplified example. It only has 9 items. The new listing checklist that I use in my real estate business has over 30 tasks on it, and I don't know how many dependencies, at least 40 or 50. So let's make a copy of this checklist, and we'll do it here, copy checklist. We're going to do version 3 this time. And actually, you know what, before I do that, let me go delete the other ones that we had done to get rid of those so I don't confuse things on our task list. Clear those out. Copy checklist, version 3. We will do Anywhere Drive and Andy again and copy. Now this time it says 1 checklist was copied, 9 tasks copied, 8 task dependencies were added successfully, and 7 tasks were made inactive successfully. So what happens with task dependencies is that the dependent tasks do get copied to the task list when the checklist is copied, but they get marked inactive. So let's go look at our task list, and now we only have 2 things showing up, and they're both assigned to Andy. And if you remember, these were the only 2 tasks that were not dependent on something else. Prepare paperwork and take pictures of the property for advertising. Now I want to show you, if we come back under here to our task sort and filter options, one of them is to filter by active inactive status, and the default is to show active tasks only. But if we say both active and inactive and update, now we see all 9. But right here we see this one is currently inactive, inactive, inactive. All these other ones are going to be inactive. So again, we see that they did get added. They just weren't showing up because they were inactive. Let's change that back so we can see active tasks only. So now we see 2, and let's see what happens as we start marking these tasks complete. Let's do first prepare listing paperwork. To mark something complete, under complete, you just say yes and then process the updates. And here 1 task was marked complete, 1 dependent task was activated, and 1 downline dependency was deleted. So now get listing paperwork signed by owner is showing up. That was not showing up before. So let's mark take pictures of the property complete and process. Again, it activated 1 more task. Now it says to download pictures to computer and edit them. Now you don't have to mark your tasks complete one at a time. You can do multiple tasks. So let's do both of these. Let's say he got both of these things done. So we'll do them both complete and update. Now 2 things were activated. Email property photos to the webmaster and turn in paperwork to the office secretary. Now both of these are assigned to Andy. Okay, let's mark both of these complete. Do that again. And process update. 2 tasks were activated, and notice 1 of them is to Wally and 1 is to Sally. So again, it makes no difference who they're assigned to. So once Andy marked those complete, then these tasks would show up on, this one would show up on Sally's task list, and this one on Wally's task list. Okay, so we've got 2 tasks remaining here. And if you remember, these are the 2 tasks that the final task on the checklist, review file and web page for accuracy and completeness, the one assigned to Bob, these are the 2 that it was dependent on. So and let's not mark both of them complete. Let's just do 1 for right now. Mark that complete. And notice here that 1 task was marked complete, 1 dependency was deleted, but nothing was activated, and that one's not showing up yet. Remember, if a task is dependent on multiple other tasks, it's not activated until all of the tasks it's dependent on are marked complete. So now if we mark this one complete, then Bob's task does show up. Okay, so I also want to talk about recurring checklists real quick, and that's where the application can automatically copy checklists to the task list for you at a specified time interval. Let's look back at our checklist one more time, and down here at the bottom we have one called monthly sales reports, and this is where each one of our agents needs to fill out, this is again super simple, but each month each of our agents needs to fill out a monthly sales report, and then they need to submit their report to the manager, and then the manager will then review the monthly sales report and fuss at the agent for not working hard enough. And that of course is assigned to Bob Broker, and these other 2 are assigned to that pseudo user assigned user when copying checklist. So what we need to happen is at the first of each month, a separate copy of this checklist needs to be made for each one of our agents. And these 2 items need to be assigned to whichever agent that copy is for. But the other one, the third one, will always be assigned to Bob. Okay, so let's again come up to our checklist button, and let's come down here to recurring checklists, and we don't have any set up right now, so let's click this to create a new one. And remember, each time we made a copy of a checklist, we had to specify 3 things. We had to specify the name of the checklist that we wanted to copy, so this one's going to be monthly sales report. We had to select the project that we wanted to copy it for. This we're going to use our no particular project, because this doesn't apply to any house that we're selling. It's just a kind of a company-wide thing. The third thing we have to specify is the user assigned, so we'll do 1 for Andy agent. Now, on a recurring checklist, there's a couple other things you have to specify, primarily telling it how often do you want it to copy it. It has to know when am I supposed to copy it and how often. So for this, and the options down here are going to change depending on which one of these you select, but we're going to do monthly, and we're going to put 1 for the first day of the month. And the first date, we're in June now, so for the first date to add it, I'll select July. List order is optional, and I'll create a recurring checklist. So now I've got a recurrence, which is going to, on the first, it's going to copy the monthly sales report checklist to no particular project, and the default user is going to be Andy agent, so I'll do another one, And again, that's going to be monthly sales report, project, no particular project. This one will be Angie agent. Again, we'll do monthly on the 1st of the month, and the first date to add we'll do July 1st. So now we have created one for Angie agent. So on the 1st of the month, it's going to make 2 copies of the checklist. For one of them, the first 2 items will be assigned to Andy and the third one to Bob, and for the other one, the first 2 will be assigned to Angie and the third one to Bob. Now, I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but remember I showed you that there's this checklist copy name, which is optional, and I think I mentioned that even though it's optional, it would be necessary in certain situations, and this actually is a situation where using it would really be necessary. It's not necessary because it's a recurring checklist, but it really is necessary whenever you're copying multiple copies of the same checklist to the same project, which we are here. We're making 2 copies. Let me go back to recurring checklist. We're making 2 copies of the monthly sales report checklist to the same project, no particular project. It would work and it would copy, but it would be hard to tell which is which. There's a video on that field that explains it, so watch that video. A couple other things real quick as I wrap up. The application also allows you to create checklist branches, and that's where the application can conditionally copy additional checklists for you, and which can basically take your team in different directions based on what they learn as they go through a process. I know that's sort of cryptic. I don't have time to really say more without going into a lot of details. There'll be a video on it, so be sure to check out checklist branches. It's really cool. Also on our checklist, on the items on a checklist, there is a delay days item which lets you deliberately delay when some things on the checklist would be assigned to the user. You can also create task classes under your org setup, which basically allow you to assign things on a checklist to a given task class, and then the user can filter their task list to see only things that belong to a given task class. So it basically allows them to work more efficiently by focusing on one type of tasks at a time. Actually, let me go back under my checklist branches. I'm going to delete that one. Let me show you one thing about that. That won't take too long. It's kind of cool. Okay, let's look at this checklist. Here we have a listing expiring checklist. Basically in real estate, when a listing is expiring, basically we listed it for sale, it didn't sell, we had a certain time period, and so that's expiring. So the owner has 2 choices. They can either relist it for another period of time and will continue selling it, or they can just let it expire and go do something else. Well, what we're going to do next is going to depend on their decision of whether they want to relist the property or not. So on the listing expiring checklist, I only have one thing: notify owner that listing is expiring and find out if they want to renew it. Then I have 2 other checklists: expiring checklist, relist property. So this is if they do want to relist the property, in which case we're going to prepare the listing renewal form, get it signed by the owner, and change the expiration date in MLS. If they don't want to renew it, we can use the don't relist property, in which case we're going to pick up our sign and lockbox from the house. We're going to return the key from the lockbox to the owner and turn in the sign and lockbox to the office. So which we're going to do is going to depend on the owner's decision here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come under checklist and do checklist branches. I'm going to create a new one. And first I have to select which checklist, and this is going to be the starting checklist. Where are you going to start? And I'm going to say we're going to start with the expiring listing checklist. I'm going to add it. Now, so it's going to, then I'm going to select the item on which to base the branch. This only has one item, so it's going to be based on notify owner that listing is expiring and find out if they want to renew it. Now, then you have to ask a branch question. It has to be a yes or no question. So I'm going to say, does the owner want to relist the property? This is what it's going to ask your user. Then you have a yes checklist to copy and a no checklist to copy. So if it's yes, basically if the owner's answer is yes, we want to do the relist property, and if their answer is no, we want to do the don't relist property. Now, In this case, we have both, but you might only have one or the other. If you didn't, let's say if you didn't have one for no, then if you answered no, then nothing would happen. But if you answered yes, then it would copy this. So you may only have one or the other. Obviously, if you didn't have either one, you wouldn't even need the branch. But we're going to say don't relist property. So we're going to add that new branch, and let's go to our checklist. Let's delete the copy of our checklist that we had out there. And let's copy a checklist of expiring listing, and let's say anywhere drive, Andy, and copy it. So we only have one item on it, and when we look at that item, okay, there's only one thing: notify owner that listing is expiring and find out if they want to renew it. And it has a question: does the owner want to relist the property? And he has three choices here: yes, no, and don't answer yet. That kind of wrapped. The don't answer yet is the third one. And basically, if you try to mark it complete without answering the question and you do it, it's going to give you an error. It's going to say it was not marked complete because you did not answer the question. You must answer the question. And also, if you go ahead, if you select, notice that this is task complete has said no. If you select yes, it'll mark it complete for you. Or if you say no, it will. But if you say don't answer yet, it's going to put it to no. So let's say yes, they want to relist the property and process that. Now it marked one task complete, copied a checklist. So now it tells him to prepare the listing renewal form. And I didn't go into it on that. The reason it's only showing the one item is because of dependencies. Remember, we did task dependencies under relist property. Get it signed is dependent on preparing the renewal form, and change the expiration date is dependent on getting it signed. So this will work just like our other ones. If we mark that yes, then it tells us to get it signed, and if we mark that yes, it'll tell us to change the expiration date, and then we're done. But let's do it again. Expiring listing, and we'll do, this time we'll do 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, and we'll do Angie, copy it. Okay, on the main page it tells her to notify the owner that it's expiring and find out if they want to renew it. This time we'll say no, they don't want to renew the listing, and when we process that, it copied the checklist for us, but this time it tells Angie to pick up the sign and lockbox from the house, return the key to the owner, and we'll mark those complete, and then turn the sign and lockbox into the office. So that's how checklist branches work. So I've talked for long enough. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out the other videos.